The map was not drawn on parchment, but etched into a piece of polished lapis lazuli, a dark star-dusted blue that seemed to hold the secrets of the firmament. It was a cartographer's impossible dream, showing routes that didn't yet exist and cities lost to sand. Yet, for Kian, the wealthy merchant of Nishapur, it represented a debt of honor, a sacred trust, and the only path he could take to escape the echo of his own betrayal. He would have to cross the desolate, haunted heart of the world, carrying a relic of unimaginable value to a land he had only known in whispered, fantastical tales. His journey, fueled by a dying man's last breath, would either redeem his soul or bury him in the unforgiving dust of the Silk Road. The year is 863 CE. The city is Nishapur, a jewel of the Khorasan region in Persia, a vital artery on the immense, throbbing body of the Silk Road. The air in the Nishapur Grand Bazaar was a heady, chaotic perfume. The sweet musk of dried apricots from Samarkand, the metallic tang of newly forged steel from Isfahan, the faint, exotic spice of true cinnamon that had traveled from the distant south. Kian, a man in his early 30s, whose elegant charcoal-gray silk tunic and meticulous beard announced his status, stood by a stall selling exquisite calligraphy brushes. He wasn't there to shop. He was there to listen to the whispers beneath the commerce. Kian was not merely a merchant, he was a master of the Dar al-Tijara, the house of commerce. His caravans, laden with turquoise, glazed ceramics, and the finest dyed cotton, stretched from the Abbasid Caliphate's capital in Baghdad to the edges of the Uyghur Khaganate. He understood the pulse of the market, the subtle shift in a gold dinar's weight, the lie hidden behind a salesman's smile. Today, however, he was looking for something more elusive, a discreet guide, one who knew the hidden trails leading past the fortified garrison towns and into the treacherous, bandit-ridden stretch toward the Tarim Basin. A shadow fell across the sun-drenched stall. "The brush you admire, Master Kian, is made from the hair of a Siberian wolf. It holds the ink like a promise." Kian turned slowly. The speaker was Reza, a small, wiry man who seemed to dissolve into the shadows even when standing in full light. Reza was a fixer, an informant, and a man whose network of secrets stretched like invisible silken threads across the entire region. "I need no promises, Reza," Kian said, his voice calm, measured. "I need safe passage, a route northeast toward the Jade Gate, a path for a small, unburdened party." Reza's eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian chips, flicked over Kian's attire. "The master merchant of Nishapur travels light to the edge of the world? That sounds like a flight, not a trade route. The Jade Gate is 1,000 leagues of thirst and mountains. It costs fortunes to pass that way, even more to pass unseen." Kian stated, "I am prepared to pay 3 times the standard rate, and this is a matter of personal honor, not commerce. No questions asked. The guide must speak at least 2 dialects of Sogdian, know the way through the Pamir passes, and most importantly, be loyal unto death." Reza's lips curled into a dry, mirthless smile. "Loyalty is a rare commodity, Master Kian, but for the price of 3 caravans, I can procure a temporary divinity. Give me 2 days." Kian gave a curt nod. The exchange was complete. The transaction, however, had begun months earlier, in the stifling, blood-scented air of a tent on the battlefield of the Safavids' campaign. The last wish. 3 months prior, Kian had been called to the tent of his oldest and dearest friend, Barakat. They had grown up together, the son of a wealthy merchant and the son of a master potter, their bond sealed by shared ambition and a mutual passion for the hidden lore of the world. Barakat had chosen the life of a traveling scholar and occasional military aid, and his wounds were mortal. A Safarid blade had found its mark. Kian sat beside the cot, the dim lamplight exposing the terrible pallor of Barakat's face. "The physician says you must rest, old friend." Barakat coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He ignored the pleasantry. "Do not lie to me, Kian. My journey is near its end. But my task is not finished. It is for you now." From beneath his rough woolen tunic, Barakat weakly pulled a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. It was the lapis lazuli map Kian had examined, no larger than his palm, cool to the touch and mesmerizing. The etching was not done with a chisel, but with a diamond point, incredibly fine. "This is no ordinary map," Barakat whispered, his voice fading. "It is a record of a route, the route of my ancestor, an envoy sent by the Sasanian Shahanshah to the Tang court 3 centuries ago. On this route lies a deposit, a treasure, not of gold, but of knowledge." Barakat's eyes glazed with fever, focused on Kian. "My promise was to retrieve the scroll of the 10,000 names before the Caliphate's agents or the desert raiders could find it. It is not an imperial secret, Kian. It is the life work of my family, a lost compendium of astronomy, geometry, and philosophy, meticulously translated and preserved from Greek and Sanskrit sources. If it is lost, centuries of learning die." "Where is it?" Kian asked, his mind racing, already analyzing the logistics of such an impossible recovery. "The map leads to a hidden Karez, an ancient underground aqueduct near the oasis of Dunhang. The scroll is hidden within the walls of a decommissioned cave shrine called Mingshasan. You will recognize the place. The carvings of musicians will weep lapis tears in the light of the solstice moon." Barakat squeezed Kian's hand with surprising strength. "Kian, I was followed. They know of the scroll. They are alchemia, the secretive alchemists who serve the Caliph's inner circle. They seek this knowledge not for scholarship, but for power. They want to weaponize the mathematics. Do not let them have it. It must go to the only man I trust with it, a true scholar, Master Liang of the Librarian of Chang'an." He closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. "Promise me, Kian, fulfill my journey, redeem my ancestors' failure. It is the only thing that matters." Kian, a man of commerce who valued his ledger more than his life, felt an anchor drop in his heart. This was more than a transaction. It was a soul debt. "I promise you, Barakat, by the grace of Allah and the integrity of my own name, the scroll will reach Master Liang in Chang'an." Barakat smiled, a peaceful, final expression. He died moments later, the lapis lazuli map cooling in Kian's hand. The burden of the lapis. Now 2 days after his meeting with Reza, Kian stood on the edge of the sprawling city. He had liquidated a considerable portion of his assets into easily portable gold leaf, sold 2 caravans, and given his chief accountant full power over his remaining affairs. He had told his family he was embarking on a critical, long-term trade mission to the farthest reaches of Sogdia. The lie tasted like ash. Reza appeared on cue, not with a flourish, but with 2 figures emerging from the pre-dawn mist. The first was the guide, Zara. She was a woman of indeterminate age, dressed in practical, weathered leather, her face partially obscured by a headscarf wrapped tightly against the cold desert winds. She carried a short, recurved bow and a quiver full of arrows fletched with what looked like hawk feathers. Her eyes were startlingly light, the color of desert quartz, and assessed Kian with a cold, professional detachment. Zara is a scout of the Kathornigan Valley. She knows the passes better than the ibex, Reza said. She will not speak of where you go or why. She requires payment in advance, half gold leaf, half fine steel blades. Done, Kian agreed, studying Zara. She did not look like a typical guide. She looked like a survivor. The second figure was a surprise. He was a young man, barely 20, his clothes patched but clean, his eyes wide and intelligent. He carried a bulky leather satchel. "This is my nephew, Ardashir," Reza said, a flicker of genuine affection in his voice. "He is an apprentice cartographer, knows half a dozen regional tongues, and can mend a saddle or a broken bone. He goes as your scribe and second pair of eyes. He travels free, on my account, for the favor you showed me 2 years ago." Kian nodded, accepting the unexpected addition. His small party of 3 was assembled. "You must leave now, Master Kian." Zara's voice was a low, gravelly whisper. "The shadows lengthen quickly on the road you choose, and the watchers from the Caliphate have begun asking questions about a certain deceased scholar and a piece of blue rock. The desert is thirsty, but the secret police are more so." The mention of the Caliphate's agents, Alchemia, sent a cold dread through Kian. They were already too close. He mounted his camel, a powerful, temperamental male named Saba, the morning wind. Kian clutched the lapis lazuli map, its weight feeling like an anchor forged of destiny. The promise was clear. The task was impossible. The road was death. And the journey had just begun. The first weeks were a baptism by dust and exhaustion. Kian, a man accustomed to the plush cushions of his accounting house and the smooth negotiation of the bazaar, was now a student of the elemental world. His fine camel, Saba, proved its worth, its broad, silent feet eating up the miles of grit and stone, but Kian's body ached in protest. Their route skirted the northern edge of the formidable Kevir salt desert, a treacherous expanse where mirages danced and silence was the loudest sound. Zara, their guide, was a woman of perfectly calibrated to this environment. She moved with an economy of motion, her light eyes constantly scanning the horizon, reading the shifting sands as others read a book. She spoke rarely, usually in clipped necessary instructions: "Water now, veer north," or "Silence, listen to the wind." Young Ardashir, surprisingly, was not a burden. He proved to be a meticulous record keeper, tracking their provisions, the daily temperature, and, most importantly, carefully copying the intricate etchings on the lapis lazuli map onto durable goat parchment using a fine graphite pencil. He was a curious sponge, absorbing every detail of the journey, driven by the thrill of exploration and the knowledge that they were following a lost ancestral path. "Master Kian," Ardashir said one evening as they huddled near a small smokeless fire, the stars overhead a startling canopy of white light. "This lapis map, the symbols are unlike any cartography I've studied. They are not purely functional. They seem mnemonic." Kian, nursing a cup of mint tea, looked at the polished blue stone. "Explain." "Look here," Ardashir pointed with a slender finger. "The line representing the Oxus River is not just a river, it is drawn as a serpent swallowing its tail.
And this cluster of mountains, the Pamirs, are rendered as the open palm of a divine hand. My uncle Barakat, may he rest in peace, intended this map to be a puzzle. It guides only those who know the story behind the place. Kian felt a surge of respect for the boy's sharp mind. This wasn't merely a geographical challenge, it was an intellectual one, securing the information against unworthy hands. The shadow of the Alchimia. Their caution proved justified. One afternoon, as Zara led them through a narrow, rocky defile, she suddenly halted, holding up a clenched fist. "Dismount. Hide the camels behind the sandstone outcrop. Now," she commanded, her voice sharp as a glass shard. Kian and Ardashir scrambled to comply. Zara quickly melted into the rocks above them, her bow already strung. Minutes later, a small party of 4 riders came into view. They were not bandits. They wore the uniform dark green robes of the Caliphate's provincial garrison, but their movements were too precise, too practiced for mere soldiers. They were scouts, and their leader, a tall man whose face was gaunt and cruel, carried a small, highly polished spyglass. "Alchimia," Kian muttered, recognizing the ruthless efficiency of their pursuit. These were the Caliphate's secret agents, ostensibly seeking lost knowledge, but in truth seeking power. The leader dismounted and examined the ground. He found the faint trail left by Saba's large feet. Kian's heart hammered against his ribs. "The trader is not far," the leader's voice, harsh and accented, echoed through the pass. "He is following the ancient Sogdian route. Find him. The scroll is knowledge. Knowledge is dominion. The Caliph must have dominion." As the group moved on, disappearing further down the defile, Kian felt a chilling realization. They were not simply trailing him. They knew which route he had taken. Someone in Nishapur had talked. The web of the Alchimia was far-reaching.
"They are good," Zahara said, dropping lightly down beside them, her face impassive. "Too good for hired plaids. They will be ahead of us soon. We must change our path. We go higher." The ascent to the roof of the world. Zahara steered them away from the traditional, well-traveled passes of the Pamir Mountains and toward a brutal, rarely used path, the White Pass, known only to nomadic shepherds. This was the legendary roof of the world, where the air was thin and the cold was absolute. The journey transformed Kian's perspective. He had traded for the finest Chinese silks and knew the value of jade, but here the only valuable commodity was the next breath. Ardashir suffered terribly from the altitude, his young face turning gray, but he refused to complain, often finding small wind-sheltered places to boil snow for water. It was during their crossing of a treacherous glacial stream that Kian truly understood Zahara. A sudden melt-off sent a torrent of frigid water rushing down the slope. Ardashir lost his footing. Without a word or moment's hesitation, Zahara, moving with astonishing speed and strength, secured a rope around her waist, plunged into the icy torrent, and hauled the struggling boy to safety. She did not seek thanks, merely a new supply of dry kindling. "You saved his life, Zahara," Kian said later, offering her a double portion of dried mutton. Zahara accepted the food, her gaze fixed on the darkening mountainside. "Your money pays for a safe journey, Master Kian. A safe journey requires all 3 travelers to arrive." Her reasoning was purely pragmatic, yet Kian sensed a deep, unspoken code of honor beneath her harsh exterior. The Pamir Riddle. As they descended the eastern slopes of the Pamirs, the lapis map finally provided its critical piece of information.
They reached a secluded valley surrounded by towering snow-capped peaks that glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Look, Master Kian," Ardashir exclaimed, holding the parchment copy next to the lapis. "The map shows a river splitting into 5 channels here. But look closer at the river on the stone. It's not a river. It's a line of 5 identical stylized Sogdian letters." Kian leaned in, holding his lamp closer. The 5 etchings, almost imperceptible, were the Sogdian characters for water. "And what does 5 waters signify?" Kian asked. Zahara, who had been listening with uncharacteristic attention, pointed to the ground. "This valley is where 5 great tributaries of the Tarim River begin. The map is telling you the truth is hidden in the confluence. The scroll is not far from where the waters gather." Ardashir traced the lines on the map. "And the last symbol, it's a stylized knot, Master Kian, a knot that can only be undone by a specific force." "The knot is the challenge," Kian concluded, tapping the final etching. "And the force, it must be the wind. We are heading into the desert, the land of wind and sand. The clue to the location of Barakat's treasure is in the wind-sculpted landscape near Dunhuang." The team had bonded. Kian provided the resources and the driving purpose. Ardashir provided the intellectual key, and Zahara provided the survival and combat expertise. They were no longer just a merchant and his hired hands, but a trio united by the impossible promise. The legendary oasis of Dunhuang, the key to the Jade Gate and the secret of the scroll, was now within reach. But the Al-Khamia were likely waiting. The journey was about to become a desperate race against time. The transition from the icy peaks of the Pamirs to the simmering expanse of the Tarim Basin was jarring. The air, once thin and stinging, grew heavy with heat and the fine, abrasive dust of the Taklamakan Desert, the go-in-and-you-won't-come-out land. Their target, the oasis town of Dunhuang, was near the eastern edge of this colossal, merciless desert, a strategic bottleneck where all northern and southern Silk Road branches converged before the final push toward the Jade Gate. They traveled by night when the desert cooled and the stars provided their only light. Kian was still a merchant at heart, but he had honed a new sense of awareness. He could now distinguish the sound of a desert fox from a distant camel bell. The Uyghur checkpoint. Their progress was halted at a garrison town governed by a local Uyghur tribal leader, a crucial checkpoint for all traffic heading toward China. The Uyghurs, newly powerful in the region, were suspicious of all outsiders, especially Persians. The local commander, a burly man named Togrul, sat atop a low platform, overseeing the stream of traders and pilgrims. His eyes, narrowed by decades of desert sun, assessed Kian's party. "You travel light for a master merchant of Nishapur," Togrul barked, his voice carrying the authority of a sword. "And your guide is a woman of the passes, not a caravan master. What goods do you bring to the Great Tang?" Kian stepped forward, shedding his worn camel-hide mantle to reveal the fine, though now dusty, silk tunic beneath. He bowed with the deep respect used in the bazaars of Baghdad. "We travel light, Commander, because our cargo is not bulky, but rare. We carry a consignment of true Damascus steel ingots forged in the furnaces of Isfahan. They're destined for a prominent general of the Tang Imperial Army who requires blades that can cleave rock." This was a lie, but a plausible one, based on the common goods of the trade route. Kian knew that Togrul would demand a tariff, likely an exorbitant one. This was where Kian's true skill lay. "Steel is heavy, and you carry little," Togrul said, unconvinced, his hand resting on the pommel of his own scimitar. My tax is 1 ingot for passage, or all your silver." "An ingot, of course, Commander," Kian agreed easily. "But I fear my shipment is incomplete without the proper documentation, which awaits me in Dunhuang. If I arrive without it, my entire contract with the Tang General is void. However, I am a man of honor." Kian reached into his pouch and produced a small, perfectly carved piece of white jade that he had acquired in Khotan. It was an object of great value to any powerful local official. "This jade, carved with the auspicious symbol of the dragon horse, is a gift for your wife, a token of appreciation for your wisdom in keeping the road safe. Furthermore, I offer you this, a map drawn by my own hand, showing a newly discovered route around the bandits near the Gobi. The savings in risk and time will be worth 10 times the cost of the ingot." Togrul looked from the glittering jade to Kian's eyes. Kian did not waver. He was selling a story of future profit and personal respect, trading the promise of value over the immediate burden of taxes. This was a language Togrul understood. "Pass, Persian," he finally grunted, snatching the jade. "But do not tarry. The desert waits for those who linger." They rode hard away from the checkpoint. Kian's negotiation had cost them precious resources, but they were through. "You risked much with that lie, Master Kian," Zahara observed later that evening. "Risk is the currency of the Silk Road, Zahara," Kian replied. "But a lie must be backed by a plausible truth. The real risk is being discovered with Barakat's map." As if summoned by his caution, tragedy struck a few hours later. They had stopped to rest, their camels tethered and Zahara keeping watch a short distance away. Kian was examining the lapis map by the light of the moon, whispering to Ardashir about the next segment. Suddenly, a crossbow bolt thwacked into the sand where Kian had been sitting a moment before. "Ambush!" Zahara's warning cry came instantly, followed by the sharp twang of her own bow. The attack was swift and brutal. 2 riders, draped in the dark robes of the Al-Khamiya, charged from the dune shadows. They were not aiming for the camels or the boy. They were aiming for Kian and the map. Kian, utterly unskilled in combat, could only draw the heavy dagger he wore for show. Ardashir, terrified but focused, scrambled for cover behind a water barrel. Zahara's first arrow took down one rider's camel, sending the man sprawling. The second agent, wielding a short, curved sword, dismounted and advanced on Kian with deadly intent. Kian met his eyes, cold, fanatic, and utterly devoted to his mission. The agent lunged. Kian, relying on instinct, dodged, the blade whistling past his ear.
In that terrifying moment, Zara, who had been struggling with the first agent who was now on the ground, shouted, "The eyes! He wears a chainmail collar!" Kian didn't understand the tactical value, but he trusted Zara implicitly. As the agent lunged again, Kian threw a handful of sand directly into the man's eyes. The agent cried out, momentarily blinded, raising his sword hand to wipe his face. This fractional delay was all Zara needed. Her second arrow, fired from a distance, struck the man in the unarmored side of his throat. He dropped without a sound. Zara came running, her breath ragged. "We must go, now. This was not a random attack. They knew precisely where we would stop." They checked the fallen agents. They carried no identifying documents, only a small leather-bound notebook filled with esoteric calculations, the same mathematical symbols Baratat had warned Kian about. The Al-Khamiya were hunting the scroll to unlock its power. The riddle of the singing sands. They rode without rest until dawn, driven by the knowledge that their pursuers were organized, relentless, and close. Kian realized he was no longer a merchant. He was a fugitive in a high-stakes espionage game. Finally, they saw the distinctive sight of the Mingsha Shan,
the singing sand dunes outside Dunhuang. These dunes, massive and impossibly smooth, were said to emit a strange, humming sound when the wind blew just right, like a giant, mournful lute. Ardashir, shivering from exhaustion, held up the lapis map. "The knot, Master Kian, the symbol for the knot that must be undone by the wind." "The singing sands," Kian realized, his voice thick with dust. "The place where the wind speaks. The scroll must be hidden among the cave shrines of Dunhuang, in a spot only the sound of the wind can point to." They found a concealed path leading to the famous Mogao Caves, an incredible complex of hundreds of Buddhist grottos carved into the cliff face, teeming with statues and vibrant frescoes. The air here was alive with incense, prayer flags, and the murmur of pilgrims. Barakat said a decommissioned cave, Kian reminded them, and that the carvings of musicians would weep lapis tears in the light of the solstice moon. But the solstice is weeks away. Ardashir stared intently at the lapis. "Look at the stars etched on the stone, Master Kian. They form a perfect triangle, pointing to the North Star. But the triangle is incomplete. The missing point is a tiny, etched circle." Zara looked up at the cliff face, her eyes scanning the grotto entrances. "The old caves are numbered. Many are sealed for preservation. We need the cave that matches this triangle." Kian ran his fingers over the map, the cool lapis an anchor in the heat. Suddenly he understood Barakat's genius. The scroll of the 10,000 names was a work of astronomy and geometry. "The 3 points of the triangle are not places on Earth," Kian announced, a thrill of intellectual victory running through him. "They are 3 constellations: Cygnus, the swan; Lyra, the lyre; and Aquila, the eagle. The missing point, the small circle, must be the northern celestial pole, the center of the celestial map." Ardashir gasped. "The cave numbered must be the sum of the stars in those 3 major constellations. The scroll's knowledge is the key." Using Ardashir's astronomical knowledge and Kian's quick calculation, and the terrifying knowledge that the Alchemia were close, they identified the numerical combination that corresponded to the lost, forgotten Cave 219. The promise was one step from being fulfilled, but the deadliest confrontation still lay ahead, sealed behind the stone door of the ancient cave. Cave 219 was not among the grandly preserved grottos of Mogao. It was a humble, sealed aperture high up on the cliff face, marked only by faint, wind-eroded carvings. Zara secured the ropes, her movements as fluid and certain as a spider's, allowing Kian and Ardashir to ascend to the small, dusty entrance. Inside, the air was stale, cold, and utterly silent. Unlike the famous tourist caves, this one held no massive Buddha statues or brightly preserved frescoes. It was a chamber dedicated to scholars, not worship. Its walls covered in geometric diagrams, star charts, and faded calligraphy in Pahlavi, Sogdian, and Chinese scripts. The lapis lazuli knot came alive here. The etchings on the stone matched the precise astronomical drawings on the cave walls, confirming their location. "The carvings of musicians," Kian whispered, running his fingers over a faded relief. It depicted 10 celestial musicians, or apsaras, playing antique instruments. They must weep lapis tears. They searched the entire cave, their desperation rising as the sun began to set, throwing long, anxious shadows. The clue of lapis tears seemed frustratingly symbolic. Ardashir, his fingers traced the outline of the central musician, who held a peculiar angular flute. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Master Kian, look at the composition. The lapis map shows a triangle that points to the North Star. The sun is now hitting the wall at a very shallow angle. The central musician's eyes, look at the pigment." Kian moved his lamp closer. The artist hadn't used the typical green or red pigment for the eyes, but a dark, intense blue that had survived the centuries.
and because of the relief's angle and the faint sunlight filtering in, a tiny glistening patch of light was now reflecting from the pigment, making it appear as if the musician was weeping a single blue tear. The solstice moon was a distraction, Kian realized. The sun at the right angle, reflecting off the blue pigment, it creates the lapis tear. The ray of light, reflected from the musician's eye, struck the cave floor, illuminating a single flat paving stone that looked subtly different from the others. Kian rushed forward and began to lever the stone with his dagger. It moved, revealing a narrow recess. There, wrapped in layers of silk and preserved cedar, was a long, tightly bound object, the scroll of the 10,000 names. It was far heavier than Kian had expected, and bound by a unique knotted hemp rope, the exact knot of the wind they had seen etched on the map.
The duel and the alchemia. Kian gently lifted the scroll, the parchment cool and ancient in his hands. "Success!" Ardashir gasped, relief washing over him. But the moment of triumph was shattered by the sound from the cave entrance, the rhythmic scrape of rope and the heavy sound of a boot landing on stone. "A fascinating application of catoptrics," a cold, educated voice sliced through the silence. The leader of the Alchemia agents, the gaunt, relentless man Kian glimpsed in the passes, stood framed in the entrance. He wore a scholar's robe over his armor, and his eyes glinted with predatory intellect. His name was Tariq. "Master Kian of Nishapur, I assumed you would lead us to the prize. The scroll is not yours, merchant. It belongs to the Caliphate. Hand it over, and your life will be exchanged for your silence." Kian instinctively held the scroll closer. "This is a scholar's inheritance, Tariq. It is not for the hands of those who would turn knowledge into a weapon." Tariq laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "All knowledge is a weapon, Persian. Your deceased friend was a fool to believe otherwise. You are the fool to take his place." He drew a short, heavy dagger. Kian braced himself, pushing Ardashir behind a pillar. But before Tariq could advance, Zara dropped silently from the shadows near the entrance, her bow already aimed. Her movement was a blur of efficiency. "The scroll goes no further, scholar," Zara growled. Tariq merely smiled. "A desert dog, predictable." He took a silver whistle from his pocket and blew a high, piercing note. Suddenly, two more Alchemia agents, who had been climbing the cliff, appeared at the entrance, blocking any escape. Kian, Ardashir, and Zara were trapped. The battle began. Zara loosed an arrow that deflected off Tariq's hidden mail armor. She immediately engaged the two flanking agents, her small, curved sword a terrifying whirlwind of motion. She fought with the raw desperation of a survivor, her blades flashing in the gloom. Kian, seeing his opportunity, grabbed a piece of heavy, loose stone, a fragmented column base, and hurled it at the nearest oil lamp, plunging the small cave into near-total darkness. Chaos erupted. Kian yelled at Ardashir, "The knot of the wind! Undoing the knot!" Ardashir scrambled, the scroll in his lap. "It's a specific counterweave, Master Kian. It requires a specific kind of pull against the friction. I cannot see." In the dark, Kian heard the sickening thud of a blow and a gasping breath. Zara was injured. Kian threw himself toward the sound of Tariq's heavy boots. Tariq, a trained fighter, had the advantage. He struck Kian not with his blade, but with the pommel of his dagger, aiming for the head. Kian staggered, his vision momentarily blurred, but his hands found Tariq's wrist. The Persian merchant
fueled by the impossible promise, fought with a desperate strength he didn't know he possessed. He was heavy and strong from years of hauling crates, and he managed to twist Tariq's wrist until the dagger clattered to the floor. "You are just a merchant," Tariq spat, struggling. "I am a man of my word," Kian roared, forcing Tariq against the rough stone wall. In that moment, a desperate cry of triumph came from the darkness. "I have it! The knot is loose!" Ardashir had broken the knot. The scroll of the 10,000 names was unbound. The sound of the freed hemp rope was Tariq's undoing. He surged with renewed fury, throwing Kian off and drawing a small ceramic vial from his belt. "If I cannot have the knowledge, no one will," he screamed, preparing to smash the vial and burn the priceless parchment with a powerful chemical agent. But Zara, bleeding and leaning heavily against the wall, raised her bow one last time. Her arrow flew true not at Tariq's head, but at his wrist, causing the vial to shatter harmlessly on the ground. With a primal cry of defeat, Tariq lunged at Ardashir. Kian tackled the agent, driving him hard against the stone floor. Kian, heavier and fueled by adrenaline, brought the full force of his weight down on Tariq's neck, knocking him unconscious. The final promise. Silence returned, broken only by Zara's ragged breathing. She had a deep cut on her shoulder, and the other two agents were incapacitated. Kian lifted the scroll. It was magnificent, hundreds of years old, written on the finest prepared silk, filled with the lost wisdom of 3 civilizations. They bound Zara's wound, gathered their supplies, and left the unconscious agents for the local authorities to find. They had completed the impossible task. "Chang'an," Kian declared, looking east toward the Gobi, "the imperial capital. We must not stop until this scroll is safe in the hands of Master Liang." The journey to Chang'an, across the last terrible stretch of the Silk Road and into the heart of the great Tang Empire, would be fraught with danger. But Kian, the merchant who had become a protector of knowledge, knew the promise was unbreakable. The weight of the world, once carried on the lapis stone, now rested in the silk scroll, and he would not fail his friend Barakat.
The final leg of the journey was a test of endurance and caution. Leaving the treacherous sands of the Taklamakan and the eerie silence of the Mingsha Shan behind, Kian, Zara, and Ardashir traversed the Gobi Desert, a vast stony expanse demanding every ounce of remaining resolve. Zara's injured shoulder slowed their pace, but her focus remained absolute, often spotting distant dust clouds, potential threats, before Kian even registered the shifting air. The Jade Gate and the Wall. After weeks of unrelenting travel, they reached the legendary Yumen Pass, or the Jade Gate, a formidable fortification marking the western boundary of the Tang Empire's inner lands. The sheer scale of the Great Wall, stretching endlessly across the landscape like a petrified dragon, was awe-inspiring. At the pass, Kian once again put on his merchant's persona, presenting a carefully forged bill of lading and a plausible story of transporting expensive Khotan jade, an obvious lie, but a persuasive one, for a dignitary in Chang'an. The Tang officials, less interested in Persian internal politics and more in imperial customs duties, were stern but ultimately efficient. Kian had to bribe them with a substantial amount of silver, but their passage was secured. They were now officially inside the Middle Kingdom. The road to the Golden City. The landscape transformed. The stark desert gave way to cultivated fields, bustling towns, and a road teeming with life. Buddhist monks, Turkic horsemen, Japanese envoys, and Sogdian traders.
The sheer diversity was a dizzying spectacle for Kian, who had known the world only through the lens of the Persian heartlands. Zara and Ardashir watched Kian with curiosity. For the first time since leaving Nishapur, Kian's true self, the masterful merchant, the master of logistics, reasserted itself. He negotiated for better horses, secured lodgings, and managed their finances with the same sharp-witted efficiency that had made him wealthy. He shed the mantle of the desperate fugitive and embraced his role as the deliverer of a sacred trust. As they journeyed eastward, Ardashir, using his cartography skills, identified the exact location of their destination, the Imperial Library within the Daming Palace complex in the city of Chang'an. The heart of the empire. The sight of Chang'an was overwhelming. It was, quite literally, the largest city Kian or Ardashir had ever imagined. A vast, meticulously gridded metropolis of over 1 million inhabitants, surrounded by towering walls. The Tang Dynasty capital was the true terminus of the Silk Road, a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas. They entered through the western gate, navigating the wide, dusty avenues that were alive with 1,000 sounds, the clatter of carts, the ringing of bells, the cries of vendors speaking 12 different languages. The architecture was magnificent, sweeping tiled roofs, lacquered gates, and the sheer, overwhelming order of the city's design. Kian felt like an insignificant grain of sand in a sea of humanity. Their immediate task was to find Master Liang, the Library of Chang'an, Barakat's intended recipient. Kian left Zara and Ardashir in a quiet inn in the Persian Quarter, a haven for Westerners, and headed toward the Imperial Library. Through careful inquiry and a few well-placed bribes using his remaining gold leaf, he found the secluded residence of the renowned scholar. The fulfillment of the promise. Master Liang was an old man, frail, with a long, wispy white beard and eyes that still burned with the quiet fire of intellect. He sat in a simple but elegant courtyard, surrounded by stacks of bamboo slips and rolls of silk. He wore the modest robes of an academic, not the silks of an official. Kian, carrying the wrapped scroll beneath his cloak, bowed deeply. Master Liang, I am Kian, a merchant from Nishapur. I have traveled many thousands of leagues to fulfill a promise made to a dying friend. Liang gestured for Kian to sit, his gaze calm. I expected you, or perhaps someone like you, Master Kian. My friend Barakat wrote to me many months ago, detailing his fears and his hope. He described the nature of the scroll. Show me. Kian slowly unwrapped the silk-bound artifact and placed the heavy, precious scroll of the 10,000 names on the table. Liang reached out a trembling hand and gently unrolled a small section of the ancient text. As his eyes scanned the meticulously preserved scripts, the geometric diagrams, the astronomical calculations, the philosophy translated from Greek and Sanskrit, a profound emotion washed over him. The knowledge is safe, Master Liang whispered, tears welling in his eyes. This is not merely a manuscript, Master Kian. It is a bridge, a record of the ancient world's wisdom, crossing cultures and centuries. Barakat's family secret, preserved. He looked up at Kian, his expression one of immense gratitude. You have faced thieves, assassins, and the wrath of the desert to bring this to safety. Why? What was your reward? Kian, the pragmatic merchant who had spent his life calculating profit, found himself struggling to articulate the answer. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and worn from the journey. My reward, Master Liang, he said simply, is that I kept my word. I betrayed my friend once in a petty business deal many years ago. I spent my life regretting that breach of trust. This journey, it was the repayment of a debt far greater than gold. It was the only way to redeem my integrity, to become a man worthy of the friendship I lost. Liang nodded slowly, a deep understanding passing between them. Then you have received the greatest reward, Master Qian, peace of conscience. The scroll is safe here. It will be copied, studied, and protected for the benefit of all humanity.
Aftermath and legacy. Qian spent a week in Chang'an, resting, recovering, and marveling at the city. He paid Zara and Ardashir their immense fee, plus a substantial bonus. Zara, true to her nature, took her steel blades and gold, purchased a fine, quiet horse, and vanished silently toward the west, back toward the mountains she called home, her loyalty fulfilled, her honor intact. Ardashir, the young cartographer, chose to stay. Master Liang, impressed by the boy's intellect and his detailed notes from the journey, offered him a place as an apprentice scholar in the Imperial Library. Ardashir, now the keeper of the route that had once been etched only in lapis, had found his true vocation. Qian, however, could not stay. He had seen the heart of the world, fulfilled an impossible promise, and in doing so, had found that the greatest wealth was not in his ledger, but in the strength of his own character. He purchased new silk, a fresh camel, and a load of goods, not for profit, but for the simple, comforting rhythm of the trade. He turned his face west, toward Nishapur, knowing he was no longer merely a merchant of goods, but a guardian of a great secret, a man who had traversed the desolate heart of the world and returned redeemed. The promise was kept, and the legacy of the scroll of the 10,000 names was secured, connecting the wisdom of Persia and the West forevermore with the vast ancient heart of China.